Pay attention to this recording. It was saved to a home computer in Northolt, West London, in January 2013. The man who lived there was 58 years old. His name was Peter Fasoli. He worked with computers. He lived alone. Within hours of this recording, Peter was found unresponsive inside his home. Emergency services had been called to a fire. He was taken to hospital. He did not survive. Investigators examined the scene. The London Fire Brigade completed its report. The conclusion was accidental. 8 months later, a coroner's court made it official. Accidental death. The recording sat on Peter's hard drive, untouched, unexamined, sitting inside the possession of a family who had been told there was nothing more to investigate. Now, look at what that recording actually shows. It shows another man inside Peter's home, before the fire started. And it shows that the fire was not the beginning of the story. It was the attempt to end it. The man in that footage was Jason Marshall. But here is what the official record did not know when it recorded Peter's death as an accident. In the days after Peter died, Marshall used Peter's bank card to withdraw nearly 800 pounds and buy a flight out of the country. 3 weeks later, he murdered a 67-year-old man in Rome. A week after that, he attacked again. By the time British detectives understood what Peter's computer had captured, Marshall was already in a prison in Italy, convicted of killing a second time. For almost 2 years, Peter Fasoli's death had a simple explanation: a house fire, a tragic accident, a closed case. Then his nephew opened the hard drive, and the hard drive had kept everything. The call came in the early hours of January 7th, 2013. A fire at a residential address in Northolt, West London, a one-bedroom bungalow. By the time the London Fire Brigade arrived, smoke had moved through the home. Inside they found a man, Peter Fasoli, 58 years old, unresponsive. He did not survive. The scene presented itself as a tragedy with a straightforward explanation. A residential fire, a single occupant. No immediate sign that anyone else had been inside. The London Fire Brigade report identified a probable accidental cause. An LED bulb, it suggested, may have fallen onto bedding. The early medical findings did not contradict that. No evidence of third-party involvement was identified, and so the case moved in that direction. In August 2013, 7 months after Peter's death, a West London coroner's court held an inquest. The evidence before the court reflected what the fire investigation had established. The inquest recorded a verdict of accidental death. The case was formally closed. What the inquest did not have was the computer. Peter's hard drive had survived the fire. It was not destroyed, not lost, not beyond recovery. But in August 2013, no one had examined what was on it. No one had reviewed the digital records stored inside Peter's home. No one had checked whether his bank cards had been used after his death or by whom. And somewhere inside that record, a computer sat unexamined. Peter had a nephew named Christopher. After Peter's death, Christopher retained access to some of Peter's belongings, including the hard drive from his old PC. In the months following the accidental death verdict, that drive sat as a recovered object from a closed case. Not evidence in any active investigation, because there was no active investigation. He had been careful enough, or perhaps trusting enough, to let someone into his home. That decision did not make what followed his fault. The recording would later show exactly where the evening of January 6th crossed from arrangement into crime. And it crossed that line because of the man Peter had agreed to meet, not because of anything Peter had done. The question the case would eventually force open was not why Peter had used a dating platform. It was why no one had looked at his computer sooner. Peter's nephew had access to the old PC, recovered from the bungalow after the fire, part of what remained of Peter's belongings. He was searching for family history material, documents, records, the kind of personal archive families piece together when someone is gone. He was not a detective. He was not conducting an investigation. He found a video file. The recording was long. It had a timestamp. It showed the interior of Peter's home on the night of January 6th, 2013, the last night of Peter's life. And it showed another man inside the bungalow. Christopher had gone looking for family history. He found the truth about his uncle's death. The footage did not require specialist analysis to understand its significance. It showed a man who should not have been there. It showed what had happened before the fire started. It showed that Peter Fasoli had not died in an accident. Christopher brought what he had found to the attention of authorities. The Metropolitan Police Homicide and Major Crime Command launched a murder investigation in November 2014. Nearly 2 years after Peter had died, nearly 15 months after the coroner's court had recorded his death as accidental. The investigation began with the recording. The most important witness in Peter Fasoli's murder case had not been a neighbor, a CCTV camera, or a phone record. It had been Peter's own computer, sitting in the possession of his family intact the entire time. The question the investigation now carried forward was not only who had done this to Peter, it was why the computer had not been examined in January 2013. The recording gave investigators what no witness statement had: a face, a figure moving through Peter's home, a man carrying police-style equipment, present in the footage from the moment the encounter began to the point at which it showed exactly what was happening. Detectives identified him as Jason Peter Marshall. Marshall was from East Ham, East London. He had been 24 at the time of the attack. He had worked briefly at a jeweler's in Hatton Garden, done street cleaning work around the London Olympics, and later advertised escort services online, including services built around authority and domination roleplay. That detail was not incidental. It connected directly to what the recording showed. Marshall had a documented pattern of impersonating authority figures that extended well beyond a single night in Northolt. He had posed as a police officer on multiple occasions and been arrested for it. He had dressed as a ticket inspector, worn Air Cadet uniform. He told a court later that he did not like his own image, that he liked the respect a uniform gave him. The utility belt, the handcuffs, the holster he had carried into Peter's home were not improvised costume choices for an isolated encounter. They were consistent with a long-standing behavior, recorded, noted, and in some cases prosecuted before January 2013. The man in the footage had a history of becoming someone else. Once investigators had a name, the digital trail confirmed the connection. Marshall had contacted Peter through Badoo. The online record placed him in communication with Peter before January 6th. The financial evidence traced his movements after. Peter's bank cards used, money withdrawn, transactions made in Marshall's direction. But when Metropolitan Police detectives ran that name, they did not find Jason Marshall in East Ham, or anywhere in London, or anywhere in Britain. He had not stayed in the country after Peter's death. He had used Peter's bank card to leave it. After leaving Peter's bungalow, Marshall did not disappear. He left a trail. In the hours and days following Peter's death, Marshall used Peter's bank details to withdraw money. Nearly £800, taken from a dead man's account by the person who had killed him. The card use mattered not only as evidence of theft, it mattered because someone was still acting through Peter's account after Peter was gone. Then Marshall used Peter's card to buy a flight. The destination was Rome. The fire had bought him the time he needed. Marshall arrived in Rome with stolen money and no active investigation behind him. He had left one country where a man was dead. He was about to enter another. Rome did not slow Marshall down. 20 days after Peter Fasoli died in Northolt, Marshall was in the Italian capital using the same method he had used in London. Online contact, an older man, a false identity, an arranged meeting built on a persona that did not exist. On January 26, 2013, he made contact with Vincenzo Iale. Iale was 67 years old. He was murdered. Marshall left with Iale's bank card and car. The pattern was not modified. It was repeated. Online contact, fabricated identity, robbery, lethal violence. The same sequence that had played out in Northolt 3 weeks earlier now played out in Rome. In London, the death it had produced was sitting in a coroner's record as an accident. Marshall was still moving. Within days, he contacted Umberto Gismondi, 54, through Badu, the same platform he had used to reach Peter Fasoli, and constructed another false identity. This time, he presented himself as a British embassy official. He went to Gismondi's flat. He restrained him, attacked him, and attempted to kill him. Gismondi survived. He raised the alarm. Neighbors were alerted. That survival changed everything. Italian police now had a living victim and an active investigation. They traced Marshall through his mobile phone signal to a late-night bus and arrested him. The pattern Italian prosecutors established was not difficult to read. Online contact, older men, false authority identities, robbery, violence. In July 2014, an Italian court convicted Jason Marshall of the murder of Vincenzo Iale and the attempted murder of Umberto Gismondi. He was sentenced to 16 years. Marshall was now a convicted killer in an Italian prison. In London, Peter Fasoli's death was still officially an accident. The two facts sat alongside each other without connecting, because the recording that would have linked them had not yet been found. That changed when Christopher opened the hard drive. Marshall had used a stolen card to leave Britain. He had killed again within 3 weeks. He had been convicted in Italy of murder before Peter's death was even re-examined as a potential crime. Whether earlier action in London could have changed what happened to Vincenzo Iale and Umberto Gismondi was not a question the courts answered with a direct finding, but it was a question the case made impossible to ignore. Marshall was in an Italian prison when British detectives identified him as the man in Peter's recording. He was already serving 16 years. The Italian justice system had processed his case and closed it. The London investigation may have appeared to be a problem he had already outrun. He had not. The Metropolitan Police applied for a European arrest warrant. Peter Fasoli's murder had not been part of the Italian proceedings. It had not been tried, not sentenced. It remained an unresolved case, even though the person made responsible was already incarcerated. In February 2017, Marshall was returned to the United Kingdom and charged with the murder of Peter Fasoli and arson. The prosecution case was structured around the recording. The financial evidence, the digital trail, the revised medical findings all supported it. But the footage was the foundation. Marshall could not deny it was him. He accepted, under questioning, that the man in the video was Jason Marshall. What he denied was intent. He claimed no memory of what the footage showed. Alcohol-fueled depression, he said. Antipsychotic medication. Events he could not account for because he had not been fully present for them. It was a defense built entirely on the gap between the image and the explanation. The jury had the image. Then the prosecution introduced the contradictions. In Italy, Marshall had not claimed memory loss. In the Vincenzo Iale case, he had told Italian authorities that another male sex worker had committed the murder. In the Gismondi case, he had claimed self-defense. Two different explanations, in two different proceedings, for two different crimes. At the Old Bailey, Marshall admitted both Italian accounts were false. His Italian lawyer, he said, had advised him that memory loss was not an effective defense under Italian law. So he had constructed different stories. Stories he now acknowledged were fabricated. The defense he was offering in London was his third version of events across three separate criminal proceedings. He had blamed another person. He had claimed self-defense. He was now claiming he could not remember. Each explanation had been built for the jurisdiction it was offered in. Each had been abandoned when it no longer served its purpose. The recording had not been constructed for a courtroom. It had not been assembled by investigators or shaped by prosecutors. It was footage saved to a hard drive on the night it was made, recovered by a family member looking for something else, and placed before a jury without modification. On August 9, 2017, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty of murder. Guilty of arson. The recording that had sat on Peter Fasoli's hard drive for nearly 4.5 years, through the accidental death verdict, through the flight to Rome, through the Italian trial, through the European arrest warrant, had done what no other piece of evidence could do. It had shown the jury exactly what happened September 26, 2017. Judge Nicholas Hilliard addressed the court. His conclusions were precise. Marshall had been motivated by a desire to cause pain, not as a consequence of robbery or loss of control, but as a purpose. Peter had not consented to what the recording showed. The pain had been inflicted deliberately on a man who was being controlled and could not stop what was happening to him. Marshall had shown no remorse. The sentence was life imprisonment. The minimum term before Marshall could be considered for parole was 39 years. A concurrent 5-year sentence was imposed for the arson, for the fire set to make a murder look like an accident, which had failed because the hard drive it was meant to destroy had survived it. 39 years was not a release date. It was the earliest point at which the question of release could be raised. Marshall was also still serving 16 years in Italy for the murder of Vincenzo Iale and the attempted murder of Umberto Gismondi, imposed by a court that did not yet know he had killed once before in London. Judge Hilliard raised a question from the bench the verdict alone could not answer. He asked why obvious clues had been missed. The conviction did not automatically correct the official record of Peter's death. The West London Coroner's Court verdict from August 2013 still stood. It said accidental death. Until formally addressed, that remained what the public record said about how Peter Fasoli had died. In October 2019, more than 6 years after Peter's death, more than 2 years after Marshall's conviction, the High Court quashed it. The original accidental death verdict was formally overturned. A man had been convicted of murder. A recording had been placed before a jury and accepted as evidence. The inquest verdict that preceded the conviction described the same death in entirely different terms. That could not stand. A fresh inquest was ordered. In November 2019, it concluded Peter Fasoli had been murdered. The finding did not add new information to what the trial had established, but it mattered for a reason that went beyond legal procedure. Jason Marshall had killed Peter Fasoli in London, used a dead man's money to reach Rome, murdered Vincenzo Iale, and attempted to kill Umberto Gismondi, all while Peter's death remained officially an accident. He was brought back to Britain only after a family member found a recording that investigators had not looked for. Human rights campaigner Peter Fasoli raised the question the case left permanently open: whether vulnerable men using dating platforms were receiving the same investigative attention as other victims, whether the digital records inside their homes were being examined with the same urgency applied to other unexplained deaths. That question was not answered by the conviction. It was made sharper by it. Peter Fasoli was 58 years old. He lived alone. He worked with computers. He used online platforms to meet people, as many adults do, without any reason to believe that doing so was the last decision he would make. His computer recorded what happened to him: the arrival, the equipment, the moment consent ended, the attack, the theft, the fire set to cover the evidence it was already preserving. The fire reached the walls, the furniture, the ceiling. It did not reach the hard drive, and the hard drive kept the truth until someone was ready to find it.